Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, June 2nd, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about President Trump and his blog that is now shut down after less than a month of being active. Now, the desk of Donald J. Trump was a political networking type of website where President Trump would be able to release live tweets, if you were to put it that way, or live alerts, as he was to put it, about current events or current things that were going on, who he was endorsing, what he was criticizing, whether or not Biden's statement was approved of or disapproved of by the former president, whatever it was said, whatever is done by the Democrats, Republicans, etc. Essentially, it was President Trump's stab at Twitter. It was his way of getting out to his supporters through an unconventional and solely used by President Trump platform. It was nothing that was going to include other conservative voices other than President Trump's. And it was supposed to be this challenge or, I guess, if anything, a challenge to Facebook and Twitter. But unfortunately for President Trump, none of this actually came to fruition. We saw this completely fall flat on its face, and it's being shut down after less than 1 month. We find out from a senior aide that this was not going to be coming back, that the desk of Donald J. Trump, from the desk of Donald J. Trump, was not going to be something that was going to be done on a reoccurring basis. And, President Trump has been very quick to create his own website. There's 45office.com where you can see everything that President Trump wants to show to the general public, and you can see press releases. You can see the things that he sends out, statements he releases. The most recent one on the news page was from April 19th. Now, President Trump does send out a little bit more of his news or press releases on websites other than 45 Office, but I think that this is really happening mainly because people just simply aren't flocking to the blog the same way that he thought they would. They aren't going to this website instead of Twitter or Facebook or even, maybe other forms of conservative media instead of using Reddit or maybe other forms of social media similar to Parler or Gab. They are now, still on Twitter. They are still on Instagram. They are still on Facebook, even after President Trump has been banned from these networks because of his claims of election fraud and other things. So President Trump is at a point where this failing ultimately shows that President Trump isn't able to draw a mass amount of social media attention if he's not on the main forms of social media. And I understand that this may seem something as insignificant, that social media is something that isn't impactful on the American electorate, but to be completely honest, it 100% is. Had social media not occurred in 2016, Donald Trump would have not been president of the United States, and I stand by that statement. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, allowing him and his campaign to be as bold and as preposterous as he was leading up to the insurrection, just never really cracking down on it until after it became unfavorable or even more unfavorable amongst the American public. The lack of transparency and the lack of action on behalf of these big tech firms, I would say, was something that allowed President Trump to gain such a following and so quickly. Now, I'm not one to argue that these companies should be censoring political officials. What I am going to argue is that they can abide by their own policies. These are private companies. And for the Republican Party, which is very big on private companies allowing themselves to do whatever they want, for them to ban President Trump, that was well within their party policy. That was well within their company policy. That was well within the terms of conditions that President Trump agreed to when he signed up for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I don't think that censorship is right, but these aren't First Amendment media sources. These are social media ran by private companies in the United States. So they have their own right to ban President Trump if they deem necessary. And it seems that they have deemed necessary time and time and time again. So President Trump has turned to his own source of social media. But this is what you come up to when you go to a website on DonaldJTrump.com that's for the from the desk of Donald J. Trump. What happens here is it redirects you to the alerts page. So now you can sign up for alerts from Donald J. Trump. I'm assuming that these are going to be automated text messages sent out to supporters, essentially updates that will come directly to your phone, but rather than it be on social media, rather than you being able to interact with it, it's just going to be directly from President Trump's desk all the way to the constituent. And I understand that that may seem as something that's more positive than social media, but the lack of interaction, the lack of media outrage, anything can be said over text, anything can be sent over email. There have been a number of way more preposterous things said over email and text in an effort to fundraise funds for both Democrats and Republicans. And the media really only covers things that happened on social media. So this alerts thing, It's something that is nothing new to campaigns. If any of you guys have signed up for campaign text messages, you'll know that you get them pretty often. Honestly speaking, I don't think this is something that would be too beneficial for President Trump or too detrimental altogether. If anything, this is just a standard, sending out text messages like you would see in a normal campaign. 45 office also seems to be a little bit more inactive. President Trump doesn't seem to be sending out statements as quickly as he used to. I mean, Twitter was his primary source, and now that he no longer has it, well, he doesn't have anywhere to turn to. And also, there probably are less people flocking towards President Trump's own webpage, largely because he simply isn't a popular president. He left office with a 57.9% disapproval rating, and you might think, wait a second, wouldn't that be lower now? People have had time to reflect on it. Maybe they don't believe that the insurrection even occurred, whatever it might be. President Trump is still around that point. As we see now, in this article that actually discusses President Trump's ability to impact the 2022 midterm elections, well, we're not going to be talking about that much. What I do want to point out is that they cite this Politico Morning Consult poll that shows that while 82% of Republicans have a favorable view of President Trump, this was held in mid-May, not in January, January 20th to be exact, he has a 58% approval rate, a 58% disapproval rating amongst the American public. So that's exactly where he was when he left office. So it doesn't seem like President Trump has made any type of gain or any type of significant change in his approval rating and disapproval rating. It looks like the numbers are exactly the same, and that is quite interesting to see. Because they are exactly the same, that means President Trump isn't going to be helping the GOP. If anything, he's going to be hurting them. I mean, if you're looking at what happened right as he was leaving office, his approval rating took a very negative turn. But on the day of the Georgia runoff elections, he was disapproved of by 12 points nationwide, over 12 points at that. And then the insurrection occurred and it expanded to nearly 20 points on the worst day, and, up to 18 points by the time that it was the final day of him being in office. And the numbers simply haven't changed. For President Trump, the reality of the situation is that he doesn't get approved of more, that his numbers are likely to stay the exact same. And now that his blog is shut down, where does he have to turn to? I mean, 45 office seems to be inactive. President Trump's website is now resorting to text alerts and emails to be sent out rather than a quick form of communication. And text messages does seem quick, but I can tell you now, I sign up for both Republican and Democrat texts. I can tell you I ignore them. They seem very much, just very spammy, very annoying, very persistent. And I honestly wouldn't want to see that time and time again. If I'm going out to seek out news media from other conservative sources on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, I'm going to want to see President Trump there as well. But since he isn't there, it's going to be more of a hassle to go to another website. It's going to be more of a hassle to go to your text messages. And when you can't interact with it, when it's hard to share a text message, when you can't really send that to your neighbor or your friend or your family member, that's when it becomes more difficult to communicate. More difficult specifically with President Trump to communicate with his own supporters. And if you also notice that, he has been banned from Twitter, Facebook, and other sources, and many other social media sites have said that they are not going to be unbanning President Trump, that his ban is indefinite, that until he starts to abide by the rules, which it seems like none of them have declared that he has started to abide by the rules or will abide by the rules, essentially they're saying he's not going to be unbanned. And I understand, that there is that argument. Who's next? Could it be someone on the left instead of on the right? Could it be Joe Biden? Could it be Bernie Sanders? And the thing is, when these companies have this ability, when they do have the ability to ban people because they violate their terms of service, that's something that has largely been upheld by the GOP. The company's abilities to deny services to certain people has been something that the GOP primarily has been propping up. When you're looking at the, ban on, or the GOP supporting, bakeries from denying gay couples marriage cakes, or, churches refusing service to gay couples in terms of certifying their marriage, whatever it might be, the GOP seems to be all for that. But when it goes against their candidate, they seem to be against it. Now, the same can be applied towards the Democratic Party. Why are they okay with this, but not okay with bakeries denying services? And that is a question, but also it's a false equivalency. And I will say that it is a false equivalency in my mind. I do think that that's something that shouldn't be compared because I don't think it is an equivalent comparison. But the same argument can be made and is being made right now by members of the GOP that, the Democrats are all for one thing and then against another when it fits their narrative. But that's just honestly how American politics works. And also, there's a difference between baking a cake for a gay couple than it is to incite an insurrection. And that's why I call it a false equivalency. I don't think that those things are directly comparable, but that argument can technically be made and is being made currently by members of the right-wing media. And, President Trump hasn't exactly helped the GOP in any regard. If you're looking at the elections that have occurred, if you're looking at some of these things where President Trump has made a statement on or put his own, foot down, you haven't seen any major successful results for Republicans. If you're looking at the Georgia runoff elections, those were abysmal for Republicans. 2 seats held by the GOP flipped towards the Democrats. Georgia hadn't had 2 Democrats in the Senate for decades until Donald Trump came around. In addition, if you're looking at some of the other elections, you can cite maybe one special election where Republicans did better, but that wasn't because of President Trump. When President Trump has a direct impact on the race, when he's campaigning for someone, when he's sending out statements, videos, emails, text messages, etc., tweets even up to that point, we saw those candidates seem to fall flat on their face. They ended up losing the race to Democrats. And, all in all, I'm just looking at the election results of Georgia, and I'm looking at the polling numbers for President Trump, and I'm looking at the generic ballot data, and everything seems to be clear. When President Trump holds an impact on a race, when he seems to be endorsing candidates, when he seems to be directly in something, for the GOP or against the Democrats, usually the opposition party, this case being the Democrats, tend to do better. And it's because President Trump is so unpopular that his name being tied to almost anything seems to do poorly. And Joe Biden currently is popular. Looking at his numbers amongst the American public, a 53% approval rating, that is pretty good. I honestly think that is pretty good. 40% in the disapprove, you're talking about a difference here of 13.3%. For someone who was only supposed to survive this honeymoon period for maybe the first 100 days because of how polarized we are, he seems to be holding on. We're at day 134. We'll see just exactly how long his approval rating lasts. Compared to President Trump, if you're looking at the numbers, President Trump was only approved of for the first 2 weeks of his presidency. And I kid you not, his first 2 weeks of the presidency, and then he dipped into the negative approval rating. And then from there, it had never been approved of. The only time it got closer was during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then, after that, it seemed to expand and get further and further in the disapprove, and things didn't seem to get better for President Trump from there. And, now that he's been banned from social media, his, possibility of running for president in 2024 becomes increasingly more difficult. It's hard to run a campaign when you have no way to connect with your voters other than rallies and speeches. And even then, rallies and speeches are not ways to connect with millions of people at a time. You're talking about, at most, 25 to 50,000 people. It's going to be spread primarily through the media, and then if the media refuses to cover President Trump, then it gets increasingly more difficult for President Trump to campaign. If President Trump truly wants to be, a candidate in 2024, he needs social media, or he needs his own network. Now that his network is shut down, it sort of shows us that he can't sustain without traditional social media, that he can't reach his audience, he can't reach his supporters without, social media. It's quite unfortunate to see for President Trump, and it is quite unfortunate for those Republicans who do continue to support him, because at the end of the day, this is all showing negatively on President Trump. If he can't reach out to his supporters without social media, what does that mean for him? If he can't find ways to communicate without social media, or turns to his own website and then it fails, what does that mean for President Trump? I honestly wouldn't be too hopeful if I was a Republican for President Trump. If I was someone on his campaign or one of his closest advisors, I wouldn't be sitting there saying, you have a viable pathway to help Republicans in 2022, because at the end of the day, the way that President Trump has been communicating effectively for the past 4 years has been through social media. And since many of these companies have said, we are going to continue this ban, we are not going to lift this ban, this is a lifetime ban, whatever it might be, we're hearing that from left and right from these companies, and this is all going to fall down for President Trump, and he needs to find a way to communicate effectively. Because when I tell you, the only times I ever see things from President Trump is when I seek them out myself, when I go to his website, when I reach his news, press releases, and even then, it doesn't come out easily. You have to go searching for it. And can you imagine, for those 70 million people that voted for President Trump, maybe 10 to 20 million actually are committed enough to go out of their way to go look for these statements and these resources from President Trump. And even then, it's a challenge. For someone as tech savvy as myself, it's difficult to find what he wants to say, to find the statements. They're on 2 different websites, different statements for different things. It's hard to communicate, whereas Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and other platforms were very quick, very effective, and President Trump gave that up. when the insurrection occurred, when he continued these claims of election fraud, that's when he gave this up. That's when he effectively said, I no longer need social media. And while as much as he would want to believe that, we now know through his blog that is now shutting down, we now know through the 45 Office website, which hasn't been updated in over a month, that simply isn't going to work. President Trump isn't in a position where he holds the power over the social media, rather than, the exact opposite, which is what is occurring, which the social media holds full control over whether or not President Trump is able to communicate with his supporters effectively, and they seem to be sticking to their original bans. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.